What is up, ladies and gentlemen of the online Jamily? This, of course, here is Jamiroquai 2000 with a special interview episode of the QUAICast, a Jamiroquai podcast by the Jamily for the Jamily. In today's special interview episode of the QUAICast, I am joined by one of the original guitarists of Jamiroquai, most notably from the 93 through 94 period, a gentleman by the name of Gavin Dodds, who was one of the, original, you should say, session recorder musicians of Jamiroquai, but otherwise was there at a very important time and a formulative time of the early sound of Jamiroquai. And he just recently put out a new solo album, and he reached out to me, and we got to talking, and I invited him on the QUAICast to talk about the early days of Jamiroquai and his musical evolution between Samuel Purdey to even the SpaceMonkeyz, which kind of was kind of a secondary dub version of the very popular 21st century version of Sgt. Pepper's between Damon Albarn and Jamie Hewlett called The Gorillas. So I would like to welcome Mr. Dodds to the QUAICast. Welcome to the QUAICast.
Hi there, Brent. It's really lovely for you to invite me onto this QUAICast, mate. It's, not sure what I've got to add, but we'll see.
Gavin, it's very lovely to have you here on the QUAICast. So let me get to my questions. The first question would be that being one of the first Jamiroquai guitarists of Jamiroquai between the 93 to 94 period, what was the early lineup of Jamiroquai like? What was the personalities? What was the individuality? I realize that a lot of early Jamiroquai's musicians were mostly session musicians, but what was the early Jamiroquai lineup like?
Right, early lineup, Brent. Well, again, this is 30 years ago. So the old grey matter's getting a workout. It was obviously Tobes was playing keys, Stuart was on bass, Nick Van Gelder on drums. I think the very first show I did at the Town and Country Club, I think Kofi was on percussion with that. On the horns would have been Gary Barnacle and Johnny Thurkle. There would have been others actually on that. It might have been either Winston. Do you know what? Again, I'm going back. There was quite a few horn players that were involved in those days. This was pre-Darren DJ Desire. He wasn't there then. I think I've said it all, but I remember that. Yeah, that was my first show. I mean, that was quite an extraordinary one. I got the gig through Nick. I was playing in another band at the time, and if I remember, we were supporting Corduroy at the Orange in West Ken, and for whatever reason, Nick was on drums that night when we were playing, and that was the first time I'd met Nick. He then sort of had a little. I can't even remember quite how it happened, but he just said, "Oh, are you up for doing a gig at the weekend?" And I just said, "Who with?" He said, "Well, Jamiroquai, we need a guitar player." I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And then I got a call from Kevin Simpson, who was the manager. But I was working at the time. I was a typographer in working for Pan Macmillan Publishers. So I had a job, a proper 9 to 5. So I was literally going to work and then traveling out to Ealing every night. And again, it's really kind of hazy, but I remember sort of meeting the guys off the tube and then being taken around some back streets. And then I have vague memories of going up a ladder and around a corner and up this and that. And there was this tiny little room that we were in around the back of someone's house almost, and just running through all the tracks that we were going to do in a few days' time. And that was it. And I'm just literally writing down the chords of these tunes, and I'm sure somewhere I've still got a piece of paper with it all scribbled on. And it really was the jam on part of Jamiroquai was absolutely, we were on the seat of our pants, mate, doing that gig, because just watching for cues from Jay to know when to stop and start. That was a lot of my early memories of Jamiroquai. Sorry, I'm already waffling, but yeah, I've given you the names of the band members and started talking nonsense already. So yeah, I can't remember anyone else who was on that show.
That is really, really interesting. But yeah, I mean, the band lineup was, like I said, just pretty much people who didn't know each other, but they were just up on that stage and creating absolute magic. And this leads me into my next question. Based off all the media I've seen over that period from those early years, a lot of on-the-spot improvisation was happening in this early live period of Jamiroquai's history, most notably between 92 through 94. What was your favorite story about these like very orgasmically bombastic moments of like improvisational musical composition and music making?
Well, we briefly had a chat before you started this interview, Brent. So you're going to get bored, but I'll tell you the craziest one was when we recorded the track "Tighten Up," and we used to do that sort of live. But this was totally impromptu. The story with that was Nick Van Gelder had a mixtape, and we were in France doing Nulle Part Ailleurs. It was a show. It was quite a big show, and we were just rehearsing the performance for later on in that day. And Nick was playing Archie Bell on the Drells "Tighten Up" on the tape, which we were just listening to before we started the sound check. We then got on the stage, and I just played the opening riff, which is just a 2-chord thing. Nick just joins in straight away. I remember all the bands sort of appearing separately on stage. Like Stu then turns out he starts playing the B line. Toby then turns out he starts playing straight off, and then Jay arrives, and we're already grooving to Tighten Up. And so Jay then just starts scatting, doing his thing over it. And then we stopped and then did our track. I think we were doing Too Young to Die or something for that show. But then this carried on later on into the evening. We were playing Le Cercle de Minuit. It was the Midnight Circle, which was quite a highbrow TV show where they would talk about books and film and art and stuff. And then literally we were supposed to close the show. It was 2 tracks. I think we'd done one, and we were supposed to close the show, and the closing credits were going to come up. And Jay just turns around to us and goes, "Let's bust that thing you were doing in sound check earlier on in the day." And I just thought, you gotta be kidding, man. And so the next minute I turn around to Johnny and Gary, who were on horns, and I'm literally singing or humming this little horn line to him that it breaks down to in the middle of this tune. And you'll hear it because it's ended up on CD and it's now on video. And we were fudging, man. I mean, it's good. It's a vibe. It was fun, but we were making it up as we go along. So that absolutely is the jam in Jamiroquai. That happened a lot, man. And it was a hit and miss. I'd like to think more hit than miss, but it would happen quite a bit, where someone would go off on a tangent on a tune and do something. And to be honest, I suppose these were little breaks for Jay in the middle of a show. He would something would happen and we'd go off on it, and Jay would have a little break, and we all enjoyed it. It was kind of nice, but we all know that this was an outrageous band that I was really fortunate enough to play in, and it was sort of kept me on the seat of my pants a lot. And for me, it was I just spent my time. If that was going to happen, I was just like, right, we'll just listen, see what's going on, see what Toby's doing, see what Stu's doing, and try not to get in the way. I mean, that was the way I would listen to it, and that's the way I took it. Hopefully, I probably did get in the way, but anyway, I hope that answers that question, sort of.
Yeah, that is an absolutely amazing story. And yes, we did discuss that before the recording of this special episode, the QUAICast Podcast, and just absolutely awesome story. Leads me to my next question. Did you ever have a hand in any of the early composition work in the studio or demo work? If so, on which demos? Now, my knowledge of the early days of Jamiroquai is mostly revolves around the Know Me rehearsals of '93, where there were a lot, and some of the live stuff like Funky 7 and Friends, and a lot of the really improvisational work of that period. But did you have any hand in, specifically in the studio, in any of the, like, any compositional work or demo work of any of the early Jamiroquai demos, if they're known or not known?
Right, it was a very quick answer to that, which is no. I didn't do a lot. I did. I'm on Revolution. on the original album, and if I like it, I do it. I'm on that, which is at Marcus Studios. What else was I doing? But listen, if I'm being honest, I I I was very rarely given any parts to play at all. It's on the live stuff. It's really what I can talk about. Every now and again, Jay might have an idea or a line, and he would sing it to you in the rehearsal room. You know, or he would say, "Can you do this? Can you do that?" But other than that, it was just he would kind of trust you, man, just to do what you did. Um, and the stuff they were doing in the studio, it really wasn't. I wasn't getting called to do that at all. I mean, I actually didn't know a lot of these tracks. There's when we did Mr. Moon, for example, I played a part on that when we played the Astoria. Again, it's online. I've seen it. I'd never heard it. I didn't know the track, and so I just did my own thing on it. This is a prime example of just doing my own thing. And Jay would just like, if he liked it, he liked it. If he didn't, well, I don't remember him saying, "Don't do that." And so I've played a totally different part to what ended up on the record. But it's kind of cool. It kept it fresh, and I suppose that's kind of, I suppose, how Jay liked it. Again, even if you listen to sort of earlier versions of Too Young to Die and stuff, we very rarely played it like the records. It's not what he wanted, I suppose. Live, he just wanted different stuff and playing, you know, whatever was working, whatever we were vibing on. That was how it happened. But when it came to sort of writing, I mean, I remember people playing. I remember DJ Desire coming in with Taking a Pelham 123, David Shire soundtrack, and I distinctly think this is where Just Another Story came from. Those that B-line that came directly from that soundtrack, and I remember sort of watching that, hearing that in rehearsals, people then jumping on it, playing it. And then it dawning on me a few months later when we were playing it live and people already knew the lyric and were sort of singing it back. And I remember thinking, this this was done off the soundtrack, you know, not so long ago. I remember sort of that leaving an impression on me, thinking, wow, this is, people listen to everything, man. This is kind of nuts. But yeah, again, a bit like my previous answer, the jam part of it was very prevalent in those, certainly in those days. It was just people got on it and did their thing, and Jay would let you, which was kind of nice. It was yeah, that's it. I hope that answers it.
That is very, very interesting. I did not know that bit about Just Another Story, and thank you for sharing that. It is my favorite Jamiroquai song out of all the albums, of course, from Jamiroquai's Magnus Opus album from 1994, The Return of the Space Cowboy. Anybody listening to this episode of the QUAICast Podcast, go back and listen to that album with a fine-tooth comb. And I'm talking about the fine-tooth comb that was used in the desert of Spaceballs. But anyway, I digress. Let me move on to my next question. You departed Jamiroquai in 1994. What were your reasons for leaving Jamiroquai, and what were your thoughts of how Jamiroquai's sound has evolved over the past 30 years of their musical output and history?
Right. Well, it was a very simple answer. I had my own record deal. I had a band called, I was in a band called Samuel Purdey. And the irony was we were signed to LRD at Sony, the same fourth floor at Great Marlborough Street. It was the same division of Sony that Jay was signed to. And there was me in my naivety thinking, this is going to be great. This is my turn. Didn't quite work out like that, but that's the reason I left. I was under pressure from the whole Samuel Purdey guys, because we had an album to record, and we had recording studios booked to go. So I do remember it was a heavy heart that I think we were, Jamiroquai, just about to come out to do Japan again and go to Australia, which I'd never been. There's the irony, I now live here. And I remember being quite, oh, damn, I'd really love to do that. Yeah, I mean, we look back and do we have any regrets in our life? And I never believe people who go, no, I don't have any regrets at all. Everything's fine. Yeah, I do. Massive regrets leaving Jamiroquai when I did. Looking back, I should have done the two things at the same time, and I didn't. But saying that, I left on good terms with the guys, and I've always been on good terms since. So had I hung around, that might not have stayed that way. But that was the reason I left Jamiroquai. So the second part, how do I feel the sound has evolved? I don't know how to answer that really. I mean, I've been impressed with every member who's been in the band. I mean, personally, I left and Sidecats came in. I didn't know Simon obviously before, and I got to know him, became a mate of mine. He ended up living with Darren, DJ Desire. Darren's still a very close friend of mine. So Simon actually came in and did some of the SpaceMonkeyz stuff we did with Gorillaz, and of course he ended up doing Gorillaz. So I knew Si really well. Always dug his playing. And as a guitarist, then Rob Harris is in it. I don't know Rob. I've met him once when he came out to Oz, but I mean he's an outrageous player, man. Just a monster. So I couldn't have competed with him. So yeah, and I love Matt, the new keyboard player. He's probably been there 20 years. His playing's fantastic, mate. And I watch his YouTube videos because I just really dig him. He's brilliant. So I mean, do I obviously listen? I prefer early Jamiroquai because I know it. I was part of it, and but do I? I appreciate it all, man. It's great. I mean, I'm just kind of amazed that 30 years later it's still going. It's fantastic. It's really good. Jay's recently been out here. Was in Adelaide. I didn't go out there to watch it, but I don't know. I just sort of I remember really early days when there was what was that ridiculous campaign that was around when we were doing early shows, and there was this poster campaign, was it Young, Stupid and White or something? And I just think, I look back on that and think, right, well, 30 years later, mate, who's stupid now, man? It's just impressive. It's just hats off, literally. Buffalo hat off. Well done, Jay. Good lad.
Yeah, I could see your point of view, kind of preferring the early days of Jamiroquai, given your a more important contribution to the early sound of Jamiroquai, and how the sound has evolved so radically since those days. And we in the Jamly kind of separate that Jamiroquai sound from Immersing Planet Earth to probably synchronize, or I should say, AFO would be considered the old sound, and then from that point further, all the way up to 2017's Automaton, that's considered the new sound. So I can see your point of view on the preferring the old sound rather than the new radical Futura funk kind of melange kind of direction they went with their sound over the last 30 years. But awesome answer. Now my questions lead into your music, your solo music output you did thereafter 1994, leaving Jamiroquai. And as you've touched on in some of your great answers in this interview, after you left Jamiroquai, a little while later, you formed a musical duo with Barney Hurley called Samuel Purdey. In 1999, after releasing one album entitled Musically Adrift, may I say, an extremely awesome one-off album that is sprinkled generously with lovely shades of Hall & Oates and DeBarge. Yes, I went to the DeBarge reference. But tell the Jamly how this project came about and how you thought this album turned out.
Well, that album was Barney was an old mate of mine from school. Well, actually, ironically, the mate of mine was Kieran Hurley, who was who co-owned Acid Jazz at the time. So I can go into sort of more Jamiroquai stuff if you want with that. But Kieran was my old manager, and his brother Barney he was a mate of mine from, we were kids, and this was the first band I was in. I think we were called Out of the Blue. Hilarious, looking back. Barney was a drummer. I was the guitarist in that, and we would play old Stax covers, and we'd do Move On Up, Curtis, and Otis tunes and stuff. We probably murdered them. But so we always had I always had a thing with Barn, which was like, well, if it all works out one day, we'll definitely do something. We'll try and do a band. Ironically, Barney did a few gigs with Jamiroquai. Again, that as rare as hen's teeth. I mean, there's probably not many people know that one. Barney, I think, did about 2 shows with Jamiroquai, really early shows. But anyway, so whilst doing early Jamiroquai, we were started writing. We were doing stuff at Acid Jazz, and I again regrets. We talk about them. I remember getting the call, I think, from Kevin to come into the studio. They were doing Blow Your Mind, and I was I was in the studio with Samuel. Was I in the studio with Samuel Purdey? Or I actually had a gig. I had another gig with another band. And stupidly, again, I was young. I was wet behind the ears. I didn't know. I didn't want to, blow somebody out at the last minute. So I didn't go to that session. That's another regret. But anyway, so yeah, Samuel Purdey was. I had this sort of thing going whilst doing Jamiroquai. And we were recording down at Acid Jazz, just sort of doing demos, sort of not quite sure where we thought it was going to go. And then Kieran, who was managing us, he got us a deal, which is why we did it. But the idea, I mean, to be honest, we stuck our necks out a bit here. We had a love of Steely Dan. I still do. And I think you mentioned Hall and Oates and Chicago, and that old sort of AOR, they call it yacht rock now, I guess. And as much as I love everything, the best of everything. This was where this was angled. It was more in the sort of, rather than the sort of funk and soul thing, which we certainly wanted to do and we loved, but it was trying to sort of songwriting and basing it in songs as well, which was we really dug that. So we were trying to sort of carve out at the wrong time those kind of tunes and that kind of music, which again, looking back, the way we wanted to do it, we thought, oh, we'll do our own. We'll pretend to be Steely Dan and do a British version of it, which I guess. Well, you're never going to do it to that extent, but it kind of worked. We recorded a good record, but whilst doing it, we spent a fortune. So almost the second we signed to Sony, we were annoying them straight away because we were just spending money hand over fist, and then going off to the States and getting it mastered and mixed and mastered by Elliot Shiner. All these great mixing engineers, and then coming back and still not being happy with stuff. So we were just annoying people, which is why we eventually got dropped. But there was just, there's numerous stories in between how we got that record going. But it took about a year in the studio to do that. And the Jamiroquai link with that, again, well, apart from, Johnny Thurkel's all over that, Mike Smith's all over it. But Stuart played on, we did a Carole King cover called Bitter with the Sweet. And that's Stuart playing bass on that. Which was really cool to get him in. But that's where it came. That album, it came out in '99, but it was recorded a few years before that. But we got dropped by Sony and then couldn't get arrested because we spent so much money. So no one wanted to take on the project and pay Sony back their money. We eventually got a deal in Japan. And so it's been released on numerous occasions still to this day. So it's kind of stood its test. There's a dusty little corner of the internet with some nutty Samuel Purdey fans who still love it, and bless them. But yeah, that's why I left Jamiroquai to do that record. It's out there. I love it. It's still good. But yeah, I can't even remember what the question was I'm answering now, Brett. Cheers, mate. But hopefully that answers it. Cheers, mate.
Yeah, I did some good research before this interview, because I take any interview with any band member of Jamiroquai very seriously, and I would at least want to be a person there who has done the research and listened to the music. And like I said, I listened to that one-off album from Samuel Purdey, and it was just absolutely a hidden gem. Absolutely awesome. Like I said, Hall & Oates, The Barge, lots of shades of early R&B and soul in there. I really loved it. But this leads into my next question. Your next musical project that would come after Samuel Purdey, of course, you got dropped. You formed a virtual music band called SpaceMonkeyz, along with your fellow music producers Darian Galea and Richie Stevens, and released an amazing guerrilla-supported dub album entitled Laika Come Home. And of course, Jamiroquai has a history with dub music, but that's of course in another stratosphere, in another place. But do you think you could have taken SpaceMonkeyz either further musically after this mainstream-approving debut dub album effort?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do. And it's a shame that it never really happens. I think after we did the records, I am thinking back here. This is 20 years ago, man. Yeah, I think there was a few decisions again made there about, you talk about regrets and stuff. I remember Damon asked us to do the Meltdown Festival at the Barbican. I think David Bowie it was sort of his thing, and he'd asked Gorillaz to perform, and Damon didn't want to do it. And then he asked us if we would do it instead. And I remember having a meeting at CMO, who was Damon's manager at the time, and they were trying to put a budget together for doing this record, sorry, for doing this show, which would have been quite a big deal. And they were really being tight on it, and we wanted to do the record justice and didn't want to skimp on anything. And so in the end, I remember again, I suppose it's, we decided it probably was not going to be right, so we didn't want to do it. But then we ended up doing a Radio 1 session with Steve Lamacq, a live session, and it was really good. And I remember thinking we should have done that gig, and had we done that big show at the Barbican, maybe things would have been different, and we'd have got more work from it. We did. I mean, there was some more work that came out of SpaceMonkeyz. I remember we did Herbert Grönemeyer. He was a German artist who actually got to #1 with his track called Mention. We'd done a remix on that was on that. And we did some other sessions. Stereo MCs was another one. They were a big act back in the day, and we did some stuff with them. I don't think that ever came out. I don't know. So we had a bit of management for a short amount of time, but we didn't really. We should have just gone for it a bit heavier, I reckon, and then maybe SpaceMonkeyz would have had more of a life afterwards, because that was a great record. There was talk, without a doubt. We wanted to do a record with a collaboration on every track, and I remember there's even talk about, feasible if we get Jay to do a track, and then Boy George, because Richie had Culture Club links, and Misha Paris. There was various artists we were talking to try and do something. It just didn't happen, like so many things. So it's a shame. Darren and Richie are still around. I'm still in touch with them. And Darren, bless him, was actually saying this new project I got, Mighty Mezz. He's saying, let's do a remix of that, which I'd be bang up for, by the way. And I've told him I'm up for it. But it's a bit tricky because this isn't like a normal release. It's library music that B&G own half of it. So I'm not sure how it's going to work. So I've got to get to the bottom of that. But that we might see. Who knows? There might be a SpaceMonkeyz remix of a Mezz tune. We'll see. I hope so. Be good.
That is definitely something I would definitely look forward to, because as I just talked to you before this interview had started, I thought the SpaceMonkeyz was a great concept, and the idea of a dub album from a pop group was just unheard of in the mainstream of that time, and it's kind of I feel for you on not being able to spread out to other potential artists, like you mentioned, of having dub albums of their music or translations of their music to be released into the pop mainstream, to kind of possibly get a ball rolling for an interest, reinvigoration of dub music, which is very, very integral in a lot of the b-boy and hip-hop culture, or the DJ culture, I should say. This leads me into your current musical project. You returned with a new musical project called Mighty Mezz. You released a new album this year in 2023 called Let's Go Shorty. Sort of a musically ethereal returning to the funk acid jazz vein of your period with Jamiroquai and a little bit with Samuel Purdey. And it's an addictively great album. How did Mighty Mezz come together as a band, and do you think it shares a lot of musical attributes of your previous musical works with Jamiroquai, Samuel Purdey, and SpaceMonkeyz?
Yeah, no, thanks, Brent. Yeah, Mighty Mezz, that came around through, if I'm being honest, through lockdown, where since I've been in Australia, I was basically teaching music. I've been teaching for about 15 years, and then lockdown happens, and that just disappeared overnight. And I just thought, what am I going to do now? And then I've been doing some work with a mate who I've obviously met since being here, Adam Alexander, who has a company called Bam Bam Wolfgang, who are a sound design, composition, sound design for all aspects of media, whether it be film or online stuff. And I've been doing bits and pieces with him, sort of documentaries and TV ads and Disney toy adverts, all sorts of stuff, which has been quite good. I quite enjoyed it because it's music without any kind of, I don't have to get precious about anything. It would kind of, it was trying a different skill, if anything, that was still musical based. But He then said to me that he was in touch with, well, this was another, it was BMG who got in touch with him. He knew guys from BMG in Australia who said, and then he said to me, "What do you want to do? Some library music?" And I said, "Well, of course, no problem. Whatever you want to do." And he was in touch with them, and then we started. And the idea, well, I think they knew my background, and it was like the remit was pop funk, and I just said, "Well, what do they want? What's pop funk?" So it was a bit broad, and I just said, "All right." You know, they knew my background. I thought, "Okay, well, let's just do this." And there was a guy, bless him, called Lefroy, who was working for BMG at the time, and he came in, and we'd started doing this thing, and I just thought, I had no, pop funk was as vague as anything, and I'm kind of into, well, the stuff I'm into, well, from early Jamiroquai, very very clearly, but I just thought, well, I can't just do something that's a pastiche of the '70s still, even though you can probably hear it in there. But I wanted it to sonically sound different, so I kind of, I'd been listening to the Anderson .Paak and Pharrell and The Weeknd and things like that, and I just thought, well, I've got to get elements of that in there. But it really came down to, yeah, I was absolutely going to hark back to the funk and the soul stuff that I still love and still listen to, and using early vintage 70s and 80s synthesizers on there, and just giving it a whirl. So we did sort of 3 tunes initially, and then it all went a bit. What happened there? Lefroy lost. They ended up moving from B&G, and he went to another company called Audio Network. And I thought, all right, well, this is all going to go up the pictures. It's not going to happen. And then I got contacted from another guy, John, in B&G in the UK. There's the irony. He said, "Listen, this has just landed on my desk. I've got 3 tracks. It's really cool. What's going on here? What's supposed to be happening?" And then we said to John, "Oh, we're doing an album." And he goes, "Right, cool. Let's do it. Let's do it." So it took a long time because this is in between Adam doing other work. So anytime there was the studio was free, we'd go in there and chip away, until we had sort of 9 tracks up and running and finally finished them. But it's not, a normal release as such. Like, we haven't put a record out that you go to the shops, buy it, and I mean, you can still download it and buy it, but it's library music. So this goes on BMG's site, and this is for music supervisors to find music to go with their ads, or a TV commercial, or on a movie, or for anything. So how it's been delivered to BMG is each track there's about 6 versions of each tune, and there's 30-second versions of this, and there's instrumentals of all sorts of stuff. So, but we're in the lap of the gods, Brent. I'm hoping we dig it. They dig it. If anything, it's saying it's library music. It's not really. You can definitely hear I've written an album here, like a conventional record, and that's just the way I've had to do it. So who knows what will happen? But ultimately, Lefroy, who's now at Audio Network, he's asked us to do another one. So I'm in the midst of doing another Mezz record, which is good, and I enjoy it. And I literally just sit at home and carve them out, get them together, get verses going, get grooves going, get drums happening, get keyboards on there, and then I take them to my mate Adam, and we record all the acoustic instruments, all guitars, do all the vocals. Hopefully we'll get some strings on this new one, and I hope it won't take as long as the last one. But that's how it's happened, really. So it's just myself and Adam who put in this project together. But if anyone's interested in the name Mighty Mezz, just Google it. There was a guy called Mighty Mezz who was a clarinet player in the 30s and 40s, who was a white guy who ensconced himself in African American culture and music, and he loved it, and that was it. He was quite an out there guy, to the extent that he got arrested once for dealing to all his black mates, and he insisted on being put in the cells with all the black guys. He didn't want to be on the white side of the cell. This guy was kind of revolutionary, and I just think he was brilliant. I can't think of a better guy to name a band after, really. I just thought he was amazing. So that's where the Mighty Mezz comes from. It comes from it's a head nod to that guy, Mighty Mezz, who was a bit of an iconic revolutionary guy. Again, I'm waffling again. I apologise to all your listeners. I just getting old.
That's a very interesting story about the origin of the name Mighty Mezz and the work on your album, and I think it's absolutely awesome. I do hope this will lead on to future Mighty Mezz projects, remixes, whatever comes across your table. But I just love the idea of being able to record music between two people and just put it out there, and hopefully it gets out there into the ether. This leads me to my final question of this interview. And lastly, do you think of the Jamly as a whole, the Jamiroquai fan community, over the past 30 years? Do you look back proudly on your time and your contribution to the music of the early days of Jamiroquai?
Yeah, it's kind of mind blowing, really. I'm always kind of I am and I'm not amazed. I mean, it's been 30 years, so you never think when you first do something like that as a session player, just turn out, will you do a gig? Yeah, I'll do a gig, and then 30 years later, I'm still talking about it. It's kind of mad. Again, I go back even earlier than that, when with knowing and being aware of Jamiroquai, because my good mate Kieran, he co-owned Acid Jazz record label, and I was like a little kid, just kind of in awe of what my mate was doing, and I'd go up to Denmark Street and just hang out, stealing t-shirts, nicking records, etc., etc. And that's I first met Jay up in Acid Jazz, and I remember him skipping around the offices there, and in his hand he had, we called it a PMT in the print, a photo mechanical transfer of the Buffalo Man that he'd done himself, and he was showing it to everybody because he was really chuffed with it, and rightly so, because it's brilliant. And that's where I first met Jay, and I just thought, wow, this guy's interesting. And I remember my mate telling me, we've just signed this bloke, and this isn't PC now. He goes, we've signed this bloke. He's brilliant. He sounds like a bird. He said to me, and I thought, oh wow, okay. And then I heard When You're Gonna Learn, and thought, that is brilliant. And then I remember there was I think it was an Acid Jazz Christmas party. It was at the Town and Country 2, the TNC 2, which was in Islington. And Jay was a full hat, full everything. You'd see him out in clubs with that on. So he wasn't, this was for real. This is what Jay was like back in those days. But I remember Jay singing to a DAT at that Christmas party, and then dancing on the tables. And I just thought, this guy's out there, man. He's quite something. So to think of, sorry, I'm waffling again, but to think that 30 years later, it's like, well, that's where it started. No one kind of knew. I get, so even thinking back on When You're Gonna Learn, because I knew that tune. I don't know if people had spoken about this, but Johnny Hammond, I remember on the back of it, he just said, Johnny H, you know who you are. This is that track, La Conquistadores Chocolates, which is where the chorus comes from. And I'm probably not dropping Jane. I can't be the first one who's ever said this, but and I remember again on the early tours that we'd be on in the bus, and I remember playing that Johnny Hammond tune was playing in the track we were in the bus we were in, and Gary Barkle and John Thurkel thinking it was the demo for When You're Gonna Learn. I do remember that as well. And we go, no, mate, it's the Johnny. So there's the irony, Johnny H, you know who you are. It was like on the back of that Acid Jazz track. But I mean, that's when I was first became aware of Jamiroquai. And it was a buzz. I mean, I just remember thinking, this is brilliant. This 12-inch is amazing. I did go and see, they played at the Brixton. I think they supported, was it the Heavies? I'm pretty sure. And I went to that. I definitely went to that. That's right. And I definitely went to that gig and saw that and thought, this is great. And I don't know, did they have a guitarist on that show? I don't even know if they even did. But then there it was, click my fingers, and a few weeks later I was in the band. But it was all happened very, very quickly. And then 30 years later, I'm sitting there talking to you, Brent, about it, that's what's mind blowing. It's crazy. But then you look back at a body of work, it's totally understandable. It's credible. It's good. His stuff's been great, and he's still going. Good on him.
Yeah, I actually seen those photographs of that purported Acid Jazz party with Jay with the hat, with the full fake animal fur hat covered in beads and wearing the Bermuda shirt that apparently him and Toby actually borrowed back and forth. Toby and him, they did a photo shoot with Stewart, and Jay all the time would be wearing this like a Colombian Argentinian shirt, and in the photo shoot with the three of them next to each other, Toby was wearing it. So they did share laundry in shirts on the road, which I thought was just absolutely hilarious. But this brings me to the end of my interview with you, Gavin. Thank you for accepting this invitation to the QUAICast podcast. And I have to dare say this is one of the best interviews I've done with at least a Lurley band member. I've still got a few more band members I have in mind whenever you interview here on the QUAICast. But thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution to the music of Jamiroquai. I'm probably going to be speaking on behalf of the Jamley, but we appreciate all the band members, even session musicians that were there during that important early days of Jamiroquai in the early formative years, and we all appreciate you highly. And I appreciate you even further with all of your musical work you've done with through Samuel Purdey, through SpaceMonkeyz, and of course your current project, Mighty Mezz. And anybody in the online Jamley, be sure to check out Mighty Mezz. Be sure to check out Samuel Purdey on wherever you consume your music on social media. It is amazing music, and it deserves to be heard by everybody. So if you like it, you hear it, be sure to do some word of mouth about it and get it spread out there. And again, thank you, Gavin Dodds, for being here on the QUAICast.
Thanks a lot, Brent. It's my pleasure, man. I'm happy to share any of these stories with you anytime, mate. It's been a pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And yeah, if anyone wants to listen to Mighty Mezz, just get onto Spotify now, and hope you enjoy that as well. And you might know a little bit more of where I'm coming from, hopefully. But yeah, thanks, Brent. It's been good, man. Cheers.
Yeah, like I said, thank you, Gavin, for being here on the QUAICast. And if you like what you hear on the QUAICast podcast, everyone out there, be sure to follow us on Podcasters and Spotify, the Spotify music streaming platform. And, of course, the select episodes of the QUAICast podcast I upload on my own Instagram, at JamiroFan2000. As always, this is JamiroFan2000. Thank you again for listening to the QUAICast podcast. And I'll see you again really soon with more Jamiroquai-related content and hopefully some more interviews here on the QUAICast, a Jamiroquai podcast by the Jamley for the Jamley. And thank you again, everybody, for the support throughout 2023, and I look forward to bringing you much more into 2024. Bye-bye, everybody, and take care.